My name is Peyton Davis, and I audit vulnerabilities for a living. I assess risk, model worst-case scenarios, and secure assets, meaning I see the financial corrosion the average person misses. I was 24, climbing the ladder as a financial risk consultant, until a necessary MRI confirmed a rare, progressive neurological condition. The medication wasn't optional. It was the only hedge against permanent damage. The cost was $800 a month. My father's response to this essential expense, that was the first red flag I couldn't ignore. I realized I had completely missed the terminal corruption in my own home. Not just financially, but ethically. I had just secured the critical medication myself and walked into the penthouse for a supposedly normal family lunch. But the atmosphere was already tense, signaling a breakdown in the system. Ruby, my sister, was already showing off her brand new content creation equipment, the kind that costs more than my annual insurance deductible. I set the small pharmacy bag down on the table, a direct challenge to the silence, and looked across at Mitchell Davis, my father, waiting for him to justify the obvious error. Peyton looked directly at Mitchell and stated, "Dad, the neurologist required the $800 prescription today to mitigate severe, non-reversible neurological inflammation. Did you allocate the funds to fill it?" Mitchell, CPO of a large manufacturing company, checked his expensive watch before meeting her eyes, indicating his time was more valuable than her question. He casually replied, "That budget was rerouted. It facilitated Ruby's new professional-grade content creation equipment. We deemed that a necessary capital injection into her emerging digital brand, rather than a recurring cost on your health." He spoke about my well-being with the cold detachment he usually reserved for quarterly budget cuts. I felt a surge of clinical fury, not pain, as I processed his words. Rerouted. You defunded a mandatory medical intervention to purchase a content creator's lighting rig. Which risk model suggested that trade-off was acceptable? CPO Davis. Mitchell finally set down his cutlery and leaned back, his expression a mask of practiced, unshakable authority. He added, "We have a family strategy. Peyton, Ruby's scholarship and her projected influence income offer a higher ROI for the family unit. We know what's best for the long-term potential." Eleanor, my mother, who owns an art gallery, quickly tried to intervene, her voice tight with refined distress. "Peyton, darling, please. Mitchell and I have a portfolio strategy here. You are being overly aggressive. The condition is probably just college stress. We can handle this next cycle." I ignored my mother's futile attempt to soothe the situation with euphemisms. I focused my gaze back on Mitchell and spoke with a precision he understood. "The condition is neurological, Mom, not psychological. And you won't need to handle it next cycle." I used my own emergency savings to acquire the asset, as I clearly couldn't rely on the primary guarantor. I then pressed the core issue, the financial vulnerability he was trying to hide. "Now, let's audit the $4,500 for Ruby's equipment. Did that come from the General Contingency Fund? Or the Davis Family Healthcare allocation that was suddenly zeroed out on Friday?" Mitchell's controlled demeanor momentarily cracked. He quickly composed himself, but his grip tightened on his glass. He retorted, "You have absolutely no right to audit our accounts, Peyton. We are the primary shareholders in this family, and we decide the spending priorities. You've always been overly dramatic about minor ailments." He was using the same dismissive keyword, dramatic, they had deployed for years to invalidate my symptoms and suppress any financial trace of my health issues. I stared at him, observing the pattern of deception. Minor ailments. You prioritized a content creator's camera rig over a medication that prevents me from suffering permanent nerve damage. I see that as a clear statement of value, Dad, I countered. And I assure you, I am about to question every single book you've kept. Ruby finally looked up from her new device, her expression not guilty, but inconvenienced. Why does everything always have to be about you? Peyton, I need this for my career. You're just being a high-risk liability, she complained, cementing her role as the privileged asset. I realized the argument wasn't about an $800 expense. It was about the fundamental value assigned to my existence. Mitchell's decision was not an error. It was a calculated strategy of devaluation. And I wasn't leaving until I pulled the data trail he thought he'd erased. Mitchell Holt pushed his plate away, the gesture one of dismissal rather than satiety. He scoffed loudly. You're being ridiculous. We're your parents. We manage the accounts. You don't question the books. I held his gaze, my expression unwavering, and replied, Oh, I always question the books, Dad. It's my job. And the books show a distinct pattern of prioritizing Ruby's projected revenue over my literal neurological function, which is a major system failure in parental strategy. Eleanor rose slightly from her chair, her voice a desperate, low plea. Lena, please, stop escalating this. You know how volatile your father is when he feels questioned. We'll give you the $800 now. Just let it go. I watched as she offered a minimal cash injection to stop the conversation. A classic damage control maneuver. I don't need a payout. Mom, I need accountability, I stated, the silence heavy between us. Do you even know what the medication prevents? Or are you just running on his outdated script of, she's fine? Mitchell leaned across the table, his face hardening into an ugly scowl. Headaches and melodrama. Apparently. And this is exactly why we didn't tell you the specifics. You overreact. That was the final insult, the line where concern becomes malicious. I realized my presence in this family was seen not as a daughter, but as a high-risk liability that needed to be managed, hidden, or ignored. I stood, gathering my composure and the small pharmacy bag. I assure you, I am not overreacting, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I am simply gathering data. And the data indicates that you deliberately chose to risk permanent neurological damage to avoid a simple monthly expense. I turned to leave the dining room. The meal officially terminated. I didn't need to argue about the $800. Dad. I needed to confirm the motive for the negligence. I'm going to pull the data trail you thought you'd erased. The choice was clear. Their strategy or my survival. I knew my firm charges major corporations 6 figures to find holes in their systems. And I suspected my family's outsourced medical portal would be a joke. I bypassed the authentication layers in less than 10 minutes, recognizing the cheap firewall instantly. I wasn't looking for a mistake in data entry. I was hunting for intention, searching the audit trail for every access point and modification. The system was designed for convenience, not security. And I saw immediately that medical fraud followed the same logic as financial fraud. Eliminate the liability. Falsify the records. I located the activity log for Mitchell Davis's portal access. 6 access points in the last month. I murmured to myself, watching the timestamps on the screen, all resulting in modifications. The symptom log, which I had painstakingly detailed months ago, had been manually edited from severe and worsening to mild and intermittent just last week. He literally tried to erase my suffering, I thought, the coldness of his action fueling my work. Diagnostic flags were deleted, and the historical appointment logs covering ages 12 to 16, the critical years I barely remembered, were completely wiped from the primary view. The historical record showed the initial prescription 5 years ago had a clear flag: critical risk. Immediate intervention required. The paper trail was damning, but the digital record was corrupted. I scrolled down to the final entry, my eyes locking onto the timestamp. 1 hour before Mitchell was due to pick up the refill last Friday. His account logged in and manually changed the status from critical risk to low risk. Elective treatment. This wasn't negligence. This was a deliberate, fraudulent strategy to bypass any potential insurance audit that would expose his deeper financial distress. I now had the evidence of medical tampering, executed with the cold efficiency of a chief procurement officer covering a bad transaction. I drove directly to Eleanor's art gallery and pottery studio. The space, usually filled with soft light and expensive gomsu, felt suffocating. An elegant shell protecting a decaying secret. I found Eleanor arranging a display, her movements precise and practiced, the epitome of external control. I held up my phone, displaying the medical portal screenshot showing the risk classification downgrade. The low-risk classification. That was calculated to bypass the insurance audit trigger. Wasn't it? Mom? I asked, my voice flat and clinical. If they knew the true severity, they'd demand a full financial disclosure. Why the fear of disclosure? Mom, what debt were you covering? Eleanor instantly froze, dropping a piece of white porcelain onto a soft cloth, a near miss that felt like a detonation. Her face, usually so composed, went pale beneath her makeup. He didn't want you to worry. It was all part of the strategy, she gasped, repeating the familiar, empty phrase. I ignored the defense and pressed for the true data. I don't need platitudes. Mom, I need data. Tell me about the $300,000 missing from the Holt Trust. Was it a bad stock bet? Or something worse? Eleanor covered her face with shaking hands, abandoning the art arrangement. The business loans. The crypto futures. He lost everything. Peyton. Everything. When the critical medical bills came, he panicked. She sobbed, finally letting the facade drop. He said if the insurance company saw your condition, they'd seize the house and the business. He said he was protecting the family legacy. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a menacing whisper. He wasn't protecting the family legacy. He was protecting his gambling habit and his image. I pulled the ACH transfers from the family business account. Mom. Multiple $15,000 transactions to known high-stakes offshore betting platforms. The total loss is over $150,000. I let the numbers hang in the quiet studio air. Did that funding come before or after he decided I was low risk? Eleanor stared at me, the horror of discovery mingling with her own deep-seated guilt. He swore he was protecting us. He said if we lost the house, Ruby's future would be ruined. He intercepted the specialist's letter 5 years ago because he couldn't afford to be exposed, she confessed, her voice thick with tears and remorse. I knew she was a collaborator, not the mastermind, but her compliance had been the lock on the secret. The severity of the truth was stunning. My father had monetized my neurological stability to cover his addiction. He used my health as collateral for his poker debts. I summarized, watching her collapse onto a low bench. And you, Mom, allowed him to file fraudulent medical reports and erase 5 years of my history to maintain the aesthetic of this life. She had no defense left. Only tears and the raw, unedited truth. The truth wasn't just betrayal. It was complex financial treason. And I wasn't leaving until I had confirmed every piece of data. I drove straight to Aunt Victoria's house, needing validation and legal consultation. Not comfort. Victoria, a retired architect, was meticulously reviewing blueprints when I arrived, her posture rigid and controlled. I laid out the data, the medical logs, the financial transfers, and Eleanor's tearful confession of the $150,000 poker debt. Victoria listened without interruption, her expression hardening with every fact. Mitchell is a fraudster. Peyton, hiding behind his CPO title, Victoria finally stated, her voice sharp with professional disdain. He's not just hiding negligence. He's concealing wire fraud and professional misconduct. This confirms what I've suspected for years. She then opened a safe and retrieved an envelope, pushing it across the table toward me. I was able to secure a copy of the specialist's letter he intercepted 5 years ago. I always knew he was capable of this. I opened the envelope, finding the official letter. It was damning, explicitly stating, "Immediate treatment required. Delaying treatment further guarantees permanent disability." This was the data point that proved malicious intent, not just parental error. He buried this to protect his reputation and his debts. I murmured, my voice thick with cold certainty. I need to neutralize his greatest asset, his image, and his perceived integrity. I told her, my plan forming quickly. I don't want a long, drawn-out civil suit. I want a public execution of his professional standing. Where is his highest exposure tonight? Victoria smiled, a thin, almost predatory expression. The annual industry sourcing conference. He'll be surrounded by bankers, major investors, and his direct competitors. High visibility. Maximum risk exposure. I finalized the strategy, ensuring every piece of evidence, the logs, the debt transfers, and the specialist's letter was ready for immediate distribution. I wasn't just going to confront him. I was going to use his own business environment to bankrupt his moral and professional standing. The time for caution was over. The time for enforcement had arrived. I arrived at the annual industry sourcing conference in full professional attire, blending perfectly with the expensive suits and calculated ambition. The ballroom was loud, but I moved with the precise focus of a predator. I spotted Mitchell near the main bar, shaking hands with 2 senior bankers, his posture radiating confident success, the very image I was there to dismantle. I approached the group, my movements smooth and deliberate, and waited for the brief. Polite pause. Mitchell saw me, and the color drained from his face instantly. His shock was the first drop of poison. He tried to physically block me, stepping in front of the bankers. Peyton, what are you doing here? This is a closed-door professional environment. Leave. Now. Your hysterical demands are not welcome here. He hissed under his breath, trying to dismiss me as an intrusive child. I held my ground, meeting the eyes of the 2 bewildered bankers. I'm here for due diligence, gentlemen, I announced clearly, my voice carrying just enough authority. Before you finalize any contracts with Mr. Faces Davis, you should assess his personal risk profile. Specifically, his exposure to offshore gambling liabilities totaling over $150,000. Mitchell's face went from pale to beetroot red. He was cornered, his public reputation under direct attack. This is slander. She's a delusional, spoiled child who is trying to sabotage my career because she didn't get a new car, he shouted. Attempting the classic gaslighting tactic in a professional setting, I ignored the personal attack, focusing on the data. Ask him about the $15,000 transfers from his corporate account to known betting syndicates. I pressed, addressing the bankers directly. Or should I pull the wire fraud receipts for them? CPO Davis, the senior banker, a man named Henderson, looked from me to Mitchell, his expression freezing in suspicion. Gambling debts. Mitchell, he asked, his tone dangerously low. Mitchell turned on me, his control finally snapping in front of his peers. He lunged slightly, whispering fiercely, "Go home, or you'll regret the next move you make. You hear me? You will be ruined. You should have thought of regret when you chose to gamble away the funds meant to save your daughter's life," I replied, raising my voice slightly so the nearby executives could hear the context. You have been actively suppressing evidence of my neurological condition for years to protect this professional facade. Mitchell suddenly roared, desperate to overpower the truth with noise. I wasn't going to waste company capital on a low-probability medical cost when Ruby's digital potential was guaranteed to yield higher returns. The entire room seemed to quiet. That statement, the cold, quantifiable prioritization of one child's potential over the other's health hanging in the air. I let the silence settle, then spoke the final sentence, my voice cold and precise. The only hysteria here is the panic of a man who chose his gambling addiction over the neurological health of his child. I hope the price of your reputation was worth the permanent damage you guaranteed in that specialist's letter. Dad. I pulled out a data card. And I've already sent copies of that letter, along with your medical tampering logs, to every board member and major sponsor of this conference. I walked away, leaving him frozen, his professional life collapsing around him in a spectacular, public failure. Ruby showed up at the threshold of my new, small apartment, looking like a distressed tourist out of place and genuinely terrified. Her designer jacket seemed heavy with the weight of her father's unraveling. My scholarship is under review. Peyton. They found the articles about Dad's gambling, she whispered, her voice cracking as she stepped inside. He kept saying it was all for my future. Lena, why did you have to destroy everything? I didn't invite her fully in, simply leaning against the doorframe, forcing her to confront me in the narrow space. He didn't do it for you, Ruby. He did it using you as the financial shield against his own failures, I stated, the clinical detachment back in my voice. You were the expensive prop that justified his moral bankruptcy. He needed a better return on investment, and your potential was the perfect cover. Ruby began to cry, the tears messy and genuine. But I was only a kid. I didn't know the letter. I didn't know it was that serious, she pleaded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. He told me you were just being dramatic. You knew the cost of your equipment was more important to them than my health. Ruby, I countered, refusing to accept her ignorance as an excuse. Ignorance stops being a defense when the cost is someone else's permanent injury. You can have the camera and the sponsorship deals, but you carry the guilt now. I carry the recovery. I gave her a long, hard look, the one of a consultant delivering unavoidable bad news. Go figure out who you are without Dad's credit card and fraudulent funding. I choose my cognitive function. She stared at me for a moment longer, realizing I wasn't going to comfort her or take her side. Ruby turned, the weight of the Davis name finally settling on her shoulders, and left my doorstep without another word. The truth was the greatest burden I could place on the favored child. Eleanor arrived an hour after Ruby, not in her usual pristine gallery wear, but in wrinkled casual clothes, the look of a person who hadn't slept or sculpted in days. She sank onto the small couch in my living room, her posture defeated, the elegance completely gone. Peyton, please. I was terrified, she began, the tears immediate and dramatic. He threatened to expose my own mother's debt if I spoke out. He said he'd ruin the gallery and our life. Terror is not a strategy. Mom, it's a liability, I stated, standing near the window, denying her the comfort of closeness. And fear doesn't excuse complicity. You knew about the specialist's letter 5 years ago. You knew about the high-stakes gambling that depleted my medical account. I let her cry for a full minute, unwilling to soften the cold data of her inaction. You were weak, but I still love you. We can pool the assets now and fix this, she pleaded, grasping at the threadbare hope of financial solutions. Your love, Mom, is a devalued asset, I said, the words cutting clean and sharp. You allowed him to systematically falsify medical records, changing my risk classification from critical to low. That makes you complicit in a pattern of medical abuse against a minor. I watched her flinch, finally naming the legal reality of her cooperation. I wasn't asking for money, Eleanor. I was asking for the truth. and you chose the lie because it was less messy than bankruptcy. You reported us, she whispered, the horror of the legal consequence finally sinking in. But we are your family. You can't turn against us like this. Her plea for family loyalty was utterly bankrupt, given the context. A family is a protection contract. Mom, I countered, looking down at her. You breached the terms years ago when you let him file those false reports and deny my treatment. I moved across the room to my desk, where a printed file lay waiting. I didn't just report Mitchell Davis for his professional misconduct and fraud. I reported all parties involved in the data manipulation to the state medical and financial regulatory boards. I picked up the file, the sound of the paper crisp and final. You are facing the consequences of prioritizing status and image over integrity. Eleanor stared at the file, the reality of legal action against her own name overwhelming her. I love you. We always loved you, she cried out one last time. A desperate attempt to weaponize emotion. Love is an action, not an excuse. I finished, placing the file back down. The argument closed. I don't need your love to survive anymore. I need peace. And for you, peace begins when you stop enabling him. I walked toward the door and opened it. A clear, final gesture. Worry about the legal process now. Eleanor, I have a neurological condition to treat. We are done here. She struggled to stand, accepting the irrevocable end of our relationship. I closed the door behind her, locking the past out of my new life. Her complicity had been the key that locked me into years of neglect, and her prosecution was the only way to ensure I was truly free. Mitchell tried one last tactical maneuver, sending a lawyer's letter threatening litigation and defamation suits against me. I responded immediately with a cease and desist order prepared by Aunt Victoria, accompanied by a full data dump of his offshore gambling logs and the fraudulent medical entries. The response was not a lawsuit, but silence, the sound of a cornered man finally running out of maneuvers. The system, finally, was enforcing the consequence that he had spent years trying to manipulate. I sat at my desk, the glow of my monitor reflecting the empty space where his influence used to be. I didn't seek emotional closure. I sought financial and legal finality. I had lost years of critical health stability, but in return, I gained absolute autonomy over my life and my body. The price of their deceit was the loss of everything they prioritized: their professional image, their assets, and the illusion of a perfect family. I took my daily dose of medication, swallowing the pill with a glass of water. This pill isn't just treating my condition, it's confirming my independence. I noted quietly to myself. The inflammation was beginning to respond to treatment, and I was focusing on the recovery process, securing my cognitive function for the long term. My focus was purely on asset protection, my own health. I didn't seek happiness yet. That was an abstract, high-risk goal. I sought stability, a low-risk, high-return outcome. They lost their status, their stability, and their control over the narrative. I had ensured that my survival was no longer dependent on their approval. The outcome wasn't happiness, it was absolute control. And for a financial risk consultant, that was the ultimate victory. Thank you for following the story of my fight to reclaim the truth and my health. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is the courage to acknowledge betrayal. If you have ever had to choose between forgiving family and protecting yourself, please share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, strategy, and self-healing.